My name's Anne Sever. I'm a biographer and historian, and my current book is called Les Parisiennes, How the Women of Paris Lived, Loved and Died in the 1940s. I've always been fascinated by this period in history, and especially the defeat of France. And what I found was if you talk to anybody about, well, what did the women do during the war? There was a sort of stock answer. Oh, the women all slept with Germans, didn't they? Collaboration horizontale. That's why they all had their heads shaved. That's the sort of abiding shock image of women in Paris after the war, women in France with their heads shaved, sometimes a swastika tattooed on their foreheads as they were paraded naked. And really, there is another side to that. In fact, there are many more sides to that. So that was really what I wanted to look at, this range of choices facing women and how many women behaved so bravely, how many résistants. Of course, there were collaborators as well, and I talk about that in my book. But I just wanted to explore the choices available to women in fighting a war on the home front, a war without battles, because there's been so much written about the military side of the defeat, the political side of the defeat, but I really felt that exploring the grassroots perspective of war on the home front, how women on a daily basis, particularly in Paris, had to respond in order to stand up to their German occupiers. One woman who really is a thread running through the book, because I think her story is emblematic of so many women, is Odette Fabius, part of the upper bourgeoisie, an arranged marriage, aged 19, to Robert Fabius, who was handsome, older than her, but had no intention whatever of giving up his multiple affairs. And come the war in 1939, Odette Fabius first of all joins the Red Cross. And in joining the Red Cross, she discovers there is a way of resisting. So she joins a resistance organization. And joining this organization, she gets sent to the south of France. And there she meets a communist Corsican trade union leader, someone who would never have come across her path in her pre-war Paris existence. And of course, she has a passionate affair with this man, and they declare undying love to each other, but they're both arrested, and in the train being taken to the camps, they sing the Marseillaise, they hold hands, and they say after the war, of course, they're going to marry each other and fulfill this extraordinarily passionate love that they've both found. And Odette is sent to Ravensbrück, and Pierre is sent to the salt mines and barely survives. They do both survive the war. But of course, after the war, and Odette has one child who has been abandoned during her time in Ravensbrück, and after the war, Odette decides actually she's going to go back to her husband, and they have an arrangement, and Pierre is cast aside. And several years later, he puts a gun in his mouth and commits suicide. And that's why I wanted my book to go up until 1949, because the war doesn't end in 1945. The suffering is extraordinary after the war of people who come back to Paris, find they don't have a flat, find they don't have a family, their homes have been looted, and many of them simply cannot adjust to this post-war world. And there are a number of people who I've tracked through who, in these post-war years, commit suicide. Women in Paris had to make life and death decisions every single day. Did they walk out of a cafe if a German came in, an offence for which they could be arrested? If they changed chairs at a fashion show because they didn't like being next to a French collaborator, which is a story that happened to Elizabeth Rothschild, you could be arrested, as indeed she was. Do you sell vegetables to a German? Is that collaborating any more than singing or performing on stage? Historically, it's the performers who have always been judged as collaborators, because it's easy to see the images of the sea of grey-green Wehrmacht uniforms who came to the opera, who came to the theatre, who went to the nightclubs. But why is that collaborating any more than selling food or vegetables. So these were daily decisions that women who encountered Germans at every street corner in Paris had to make. There were also tragic decisions. If you're Jewish, do you go into hiding? Do you wear the yellow star? Of course, you were meant to, but some Jewish people decided the only way they could survive was by not registering, hoping that nobody would denounce them, but the denunciations were rife. And if you were Jewish and you had children, do you give up your children? I think for me, as a mother, that's a choice I find absolutely impossible. Do you give your child away? Do you pay a passeur, somebody you don't know? Some of them weren't trustworthy. The children were sold on again to the Germans. You probably weren't told where your children were going because that was a safety measure in case you were rounded up and you'd give it away. For me, giving a child away to a passeur is the ultimate choice. But of course, people I've interviewed have said you can't understand the situation if you think that's a choice, because there really was no choice. So I think the ultimate choice is simply how you behave, how you decide inside you is the right moral response.